All right, everybody, welcome in to Greater New Hope Missionary Baptist Church. We located at 7818 North Main out here in Independent Heights, and I got Reverend Donald Dickson, Jack Yates class of 1958, and his 85th birthday.
All right.
We look back at it, people don't understand that Reverend Dickson helped raise me ever since I was 6 years old, y'all.
Yeah.
So I'm used to calling them man-tan. But now we want to talk about coming out of here in Eagle territory, which is Independent Heights, aka Studewood. And let's talk about Reverend Dickson coming out of Jack Yates in 1958. Now let everybody know that this class of 1958 of Jack Yates is the last class of 2610 Elgin, the original Jack Yates.
That's right. Yeah.
And it's the last class that Mr. William Holland had an opportunity to sign off on the high school diploma.
Yeah.
Coming straight out of Jack Yates class of 1958, and it's such an honor to be here to recognize you, Reverend Dickson.
And I thank you so much.
Because I look back at your class, and man, I almost know more people in your class than I know in my own class. My cousin, which is Earl B. Durham, ran on the track team with you.
That's right.
And then a good friend of mine, Sammy Taylor, played football with you.
Yeah.
And then coming right out of 1958, you had Johnny Nash. Man, you guys was a historical class coming out of Jack Yates.
Yeah.
Now, Reverend Dickson, we talk about Jack Yates, and we talk about you coming out of Jack Yates and the history of what you've done. And by the way, let everybody know that this is a very historical legend at Jack Yates, because not only Jack Yates, just at Jefferson Stadium, which we used to play our football game. This is the longest interception. Was that the interception?
No, kickoff return.
Kickoff return, 105 yards. Nobody have done that since Reverend Dickson. And when we talking about Jefferson Stadium, y'all, we talking about not only high schools, even the Houston Oilers. Nobody duplicated that other than Reverend Dickson. And that's a legend in itself, and you're already recognized in the PVIL Hall of Fame up in Austin.
Yes.
But now, Reverend Dickson, let's talk about you coming out of Jack Yates and how you wind up getting into the ministry business. And how did the Lord call you to do this?
Well, Boo, it was nothing on my behalf that was done in order for the Lord to call me into the gospel ministry. What actually happened is that my parents, we grew up at 6364 Cleburne Street in the CUNY home.
Okay.
And there's one thing that my parents always told me, and that is that on Sundays we go to church. On Mondays you go to school, Tuesday you go to school, but Sunday we go to church. And because of the fact that every Sunday I was in Progressive New Hope Missionary Baptist Church, which was located right across the street from Jack Yates at that time. And because of that relationship with my pastor and the members of that church, my mama told me that, son, it really looks like you're going to be a preacher. I must have been about 6 or 7 or 8 years old at that time.
Now let me ask you this, Reverend Dickson. We talk about progressive. Now, when Reverend Brown was the pastor at that church at that time?
That's right. Reverend N.S. Brown was our pastor.
Okay.
And Reverend N.S. Brown came to Progressive New Hope in 1941.
Okay.
And I was a year old when he came. And he had been my pastor at the New Hope Missionary Baptist Church all of my young life. So that was a correlation between Sunday and Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, because Sunday was a sacred day.
Okay.
And that was the day that that we get up early on Sunday morning. And the irony of it all was that we walked to church. We lived in the CUNY home, and we walked to church. I can't tell you how many miles, I can't tell you how many blocks, but we walked to church every Sunday morning. And so that was instilled in us, that we would be in church, not only on Sundays, but we'd be in church on Wednesday nights at our regular prayer meeting and Bible study. So that spiritual side was ingrained in me from a little child.
You know, now I see this now, and I think about, you know, I was talking to one of your members outside earlier, and now I see how you and Johnny Nash got hooked up, because Johnny Nash went to Progressive.
That's right.
Church.
Yeah.
And so you and Johnny had already been going together at church together, raising up together at Progressive with Reverend Brown. Am I right?
That's right. That's right.
You know, there's so much history there. And then from the time you left Black Elementary School and started over there at Jack Yates, and let everybody know that Jack Yates only went from the 7th grade to the 12th grade. There wasn't no middle school, wasn't no junior high school during them days.
That's right.
Now, when you came out of Jack Yates in 1958, what was your goal to do as far as going to college and being able to further your education?
Well, I had starting my junior year at Yates. I had received maybe 5 or 6 scholarships from our black colleges. Grambling University, Southern University, Texas Southern University, Mississippi Valley University, Bishop College, and Wiley College, and a couple of more colleges were recruiting me, and I did not know whether they were recruiting me for football, track, or both. And so we would travel by car, because the head coach of those schools would set up a schedule with us and come and pick us up and take us to the school, and we would work out for the schools and the coaches, and so we really had a pick of the litter, because we knew basically where we wanted to go, and so we wanted to take the best offer from the Southwestern Conference schools across the nation.
Now, Reverend Dickson, now you're coming out of Jack Yates in 1958. You know, the Texas Southern not even 10 years old, so it's a brand new college almost when you was coming out of Jack Yates, because Texas Southern didn't open up until 1947, and you came out almost like 11 years later.
Yeah.
So it was still fairly a brand new college.
Yeah.
And you was at home, and where did you wind up going?
I ended up, I had sessions with Grambling and Southern and Bishop and Mississippi Valley. But what actually happened, Boo, was the fact that I was so akin to Texas Southern because they allowed us to use their track to practice. We didn't have a track at Jack Yates High School, but Stan Wright, who was the head
track coach,
Texas,
right?
Yes, he allowed us. I'm talking about from the 7th grade to the 12th grade. He allowed us to practice at Texas Southern University. So we became in real good relationship with Stan Wright.
Now let me ask you this. Now when you was at Jack Yates, was Coach Mosley your coach? Who was your track coach at Yates?
Coach Willie Moses was our head track coach.
Okay.
And Coach Willie Moses was also the line coach in football.
So in other words, Coach Mulder, he coached you in football and track.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then when you wind up going after you wind up getting out of college, you know, you started working with what you did. You started in the school district.
Yes.
How did that happen?
Well, what happened was when I graduated, and let me tell you how I guess you would call how tricky the situation was in going to TSU, because I was under the impression that I would be on a football/track scholarship.
Okay.
But because of the fact that we had won 2 state championships in track, Coach Durley and Coach Wright talked me into just running track my freshman year, and they would allow me to play football and run track my sophomore year. But it didn't work out like that. And it didn't work out like that because my freshman year at Texas Southern University, I made the sprint relay team. And so Coach Wright then told me that he would rather me just to be on a track scholarship rather than football/track.
Okay, now you're talking about that, you know, because Texas Southern was such a good force in the SWAC as far as track was concerned. Now, how was Status Bush and Erskine Moorhead? Had they got there yet, or was they on the track team? Can you remember?
Oh yes, Bush, Theodius Bush.
At Jack Yates, yeah, he taught at Jack Yates.
Yes, but he had, his eligibility was up my freshman year. His eligibility ended my senior year at Yates.
Okay.
And but his brother came to TSU on a track scholarship, all because of Theodius Bush. But because of the fact, as I said, because I made the sprint relay team my first year as a freshman, and was one of the first 3 picks in the sprints, that was kind of what the situation turned into. But I became very bitter because track was my spring sport, but football was my love.
That's what you was known for. That was your destination to be into the well, during them days, they weren't using a lot of blacks in the NFL them days.
That's right.
But you still wanted to be a good college football player.
That's right. That's right.
That represented Texas Southern.
That's right.
But like you had represented Jack Yates.
That's right.
So now we leave out of college, and now we go into you in getting back into the workforce and coming to grip as far as being in the workforce and then leaving the workforce, and then when the Lord called you up on to try to preach, and you came in there and you answered to the Lord and started preaching.
Yeah. Well, listen, boo. I did not try to preach,
Okay.
but when the Lord called me, He called me as a preacher. And but the reason that my tenure was not as long as it should have been was because of the situation with me not playing football but running track. And so I stayed in track until I got in some trouble, and they kicked me out of school. And because of being out of school, I was drafted into the United States Army.
Okay.
And that's where all of this other
Stuff started coming together.
took place. That's right.
All right.
That's right.
Now, when you was drafted in the Army, was you still going to Texas Southern, or just you had graduated?
No, I had been suspended because of my attitude And because of my inability to be dealt with fairly and given an opportunity to play football and run track,
Okay.
so I became disgruntled.
In other words, it threw you through a loop, is what young people might say.
Yeah.
Because you was expecting one thing and something else went down.
That's right. That's right.
Because you was expected to play football was your major sport.
Yeah.
And track was your minor sport.
That's right.
But when they flipped the script on you and put track and they deleted football, that really threw you in a really tense situation.
That's right. That flipped my script.
Okay.
And I ended up getting in some trouble at Texas Southern and was suspended from school in 1961.
Okay.
And while I was suspended, of course, as long as I was running track and I had track eligibility, the United States Army didn't bother me.
No, that's the draft. You was a 2A class.
That's right. And so when all of this happened, and then I got drafted, and so I ended up having to go into the United States Army.
Okay.
And that helped me to get my life back on track.
Okay.
Because I was angry at what had happened at TSU, and I was acting out, even at home.
Right.
And so when I was drafted by the United States Army, that was the best thing that happened to me. And so I reported in and ended up going to Fort Ord, California, in my basic training, and then Fort Sill, Oklahoma. But I had a chance to play baseball in Fort Sill, and that was another young man that most of you know about, whose name was Herb Adderley, who played for the
Green Bay
Packers.
Right.
And we were
in Vince Lombardi.
That's right.
Right.
And we were in our second A training together, so we were able to play baseball.
So in other words, Herb Adderley played baseball. For some of you people that don't know, Herb Adderley played in the first Super Bowl, which was Super Bowl I, and he also played in Super Bowl II.
Yeah.
And so therefore, you and Herb Adderley, did y'all become to get as far as friends because now y'all playing baseball together?
Really close.
Okay.
Really close. And so when we would leave baseball practice, we would come back to the campus, and we would go to the orderly room and borrow 3 footballs out of the orderly room. I could kick the football as a 14, 15-year-old, but I started kicking to her, and he would catch punts, and we became really close.
Now, as soon as you got out of and then at that time the Vietnam War had started.
It had.
It had already started?
It had started.
But it wasn't in the high gear yet.
No, that's right.
That was the beginning of the Vietnam War.
That's right.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Right.
Because I know that in the draft board that once you got 18, they send you a 1A, and then when you got in college, they give you a 2A.
Yeah.
And then if you got married with kids, you would get a 3A.
Yeah, that's right.
And if you was disabled and had you were blind or crippled or whatever the problem, then you would be a 4A.
Yeah.
You know, but now I'm looking back now, Reverend Dickson, on the history, because you are a legendary, not only in Third Ward, as you got your Third Ward hat on, and Jack Yates I got. We have to let these young people know the history of not only our school, but even our neighborhood.
Yeah.
And you coming straight out of Blackshear, straight into Jack Yates, and straight out of Jack Yates into Texas Southern. All of your education have been right here in Houston. You never left this city no more than going to the Army. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct.
Now, how did you wind up getting into HISD?
Well, when I was discharged from the Army, I was drafted by the Montreal Alouettes, and I went to their camp in 1964, and I ran for them and all of that, and so they released me and told me that they would call me if they needed my services. And so I left Montreal and came back to Houston. And while I was here, I enrolled in Texas Southern University again.
Okay.
And that started the ball rolling, where I stayed in there by the help of a doctor there by the name of Ernest Kershaw. And he became my advisor, and he held my hand and worked me through the program that I was in. And I graduated in 1967 from Texas Southern University.
Now, when you went back to Texas Southern, you had a different attitude than you had when you left.
Yes.
In other words, when you went back to Texas Southern, this time you was willing to listen.
That's right.
And at first, when you left out of Texas Southern, when things didn't go the way you thought it should have went, you got irritable and got to the point that you didn't want to listen to nobody.
That's right.
Okay.
That's
now
right.
I'm following you. I'm Facebook family, Jack Yates family. We're following it. This is Black history, y'all.
Yeah.
And we need to know this, because this is the only way you're gonna know where you're going if you don't know where you come from. And this is what me and Reverend Dickson are doing. We're trying to lead a road on where we come from, so the young people can know where they going.
That's right.
Because life do repeat itself.
That's right.
So now, when you got out and started working with the HISD in 1967, is that what you said? Somewhere within that era?
No, I didn't. My first job was not in HISD, because I graduated in August. And all of the jobs were filled because school started the 1st of September. And all of the jobs and the assignments were filled, and they had no other spots in physical education. But Joe Tusa, who was our athletic director, told me that if I would take a job outside of HISD for 1 year, he would bring me back as an employee of HISD. And so I ended up going to Freeport in the Brazosport School District. And I became the first black teacher at Freeport Intermediate School. And I was the backfield coach at Brazosport High School.
And Brazosport at that time used to have a good football program.
That's right.
Right. I used to keep up with them.
That's right.
Because see, now, when you started now, integration is just starting now. That's the reason why you was one of the first black to go to work out there.
That's right.
Now, how did they accept you? Because right now, this is a country now that we see that's divided now.
Yeah.
Well, and how did they accept you being the first black, not only coach or try to help coach the team, but also being able to be part of the administration
on
the staff?
I was not the first black high school coach. I was the first black middle school head coach in Freeport.
At Freeport. Now, Freeport, the middle school you was at, they fed into Freeport.
That's right, into Brazosport.
Brazosport. That's the name of the school, Brazosport. I was trying to think of.
That's
now, is that in Brazoria County?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
That's right.
I'm following you.
It's in Brazoria County.
And
so I worked there for a year. And I came after that year, as soon as school was out, I called Mr. Tusa and told him that everything was settled, and I was calling him to see if there would be any openings in HISD. And he told me there is openings. And he says, I will hire you, Donald. And he hired me and sent me as the first black head coach in HISD in a white school. And that was Farmville Senior High School.
What was the name of it?
Farmville Junior High School.
Okay.
Farmville. And we fed Sam Houston.
Okay.
And we also fed MC Williams.
Okay. Which was out in the Heights.
And
Okay.
no, not in the Heights. In
Studewood.
No.
Now Acres Home.
Acres Home. That's
Okay.
right. That's right. And so that's where it all got started. And I worked at Farmville. I was the head football coach there for 5 years. And in 1975, Coach Patterson at that time, who was my high school coach, was one of the directors of athletics in HISD.
Okay.
And so he sent me to Albert Thomas because that head job came open. And he sent me to Albert Thomas, and that's where I went. And that's how I started. After I left Farmville, went to Albert Thomas, and we fed Sterling High School.
Now, you know, as we get ready to end this, and when did you wind up coming out here to Greater New Hope Missionary Baptist Church out here in 7818 North Main?
I announced my calling to the gospel ministry in 1978. And because of becoming a pastor, of becoming a preacher, I had the opportunity to be tutored by my pastor, Reverend N.S. Brown. And
that's Reverend Brown that was out there at Progressive?
That's right.
Wow.
That's the church I grew up in.
Right, so he been knowing you since you was a boy.
Since I was a baby.
Wow.
That's right.
And I just show you how God worked. And he came out and helped you start ministering.
That's right.
God, and that's a testimony.
And this church became vacant because Dr. H.L. Price became ill, and they needed a pastor. And because I was a part of South Texas Regular District Association, and so was this church. They were also in South Texas.
Right.
And I used to preach the educational sermon for South Texas. And these members from Greater New Hope heard me preach. And they knew that they needed a pastor. And they started talking to me. And that's how I ended up coming out here for an interview.
Now,
but I was still working. I was still the director of Barnett Stadium.
Wow.
When this happened.
So you were still on HISD payroll?
That's right. That's
okay.
right. And the church's payroll as well.
Wow.
Because I pastored 6 months before I left. I retired from Barnett Stadium.
And
I've been here ever since.
How long has that been, Reverend Dickson?
28 years.
Wow. And you know, you celebrate your 85th birthday.
85th birthday.
And then you're coming up on your anniversary here at the church.
28 years.
And I just want to say I'm so happy that I can be here to recognize this and be part of this Greater New Hope Missionary Baptist Church right here, 7818 North Main, out here in Independent Heights, as we know, aka Studewood. And then knowing that you coming from 3rd Ward, like you got on your hat, me coming from Jack Yates, you coming from Jack Yates, and we coming out here to help, you coming out here to help save souls.
That's right.
That the Lord have brought you out here.
That's right.
You didn't come out here because you wanted to come out here. The Lord sent you out here.
That's right. That's right.
And that's a blessing thing. Now, Reverend Dickson, as I want to go and let everybody, especially you guys at Jack Yates, see the historical Hall of Fame, what I might call the Wall of Fame, that Reverend Dickson have here. Reverend Dickson, you don't mind showing us all the pictures that you got when not only being at Jack Yates, but all in your lifetime you have been servicing the community and doing good things to helping people and setting a road mark like you have did with me.
Yeah.
And I want everybody to see your wall of fame. Do you mind us seeing them?
No, I don't.
All right.